Hey, what's up, Matt?
Not much. How you doing, Joe? Did you have a good
Good.
weekend?
I had a great weekend. Yeah. So, yeah, we're doing the Monday morning data chat in a bit of a new format today. So we're actually going to broadcast this live on LinkedIn. I think the intention is we're going to, kind of do the normal Monday morning data chat spiel as well as do a listener Q&A. So that said, let's maybe talk about an article that came out. Let me share my screen here. A question comes up a lot, right? So is the cloud a fad? um, and I would say we're both in agreement that it's not.
Right.
This article talks about how cloud infrastructure spending passed on-prem data centers in 2020. A lot of this is obviously driven by COVID. Um, but I think we have some thoughts on this article and sort of the thesis behind is cloud a fad? So.
Yeah, and it's a massive topic, right? So let's point out here that this article is about one slice of cloud. And actually, one of our questions is how are they defining cloud infrastructure? Because there are a lot of different ways you could define it. But in particular, we know that the cloud is blown up for SaaS products, for software as a service, things like Zoom, for example, and Google Hangouts, but that doesn't, or Google Meet, but that doesn't cover, this article doesn't cover those services. This is specifically about things like servers and memory and disk and such. But there are some
Right.
like sort of weird boundary areas that we'll get into later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me show it again real quick. So yeah, I think that some of our thoughts on this article is cloud's definitely not a fad, despite what some people will say. It's growing, but there are when we look into studies of like cloud spend, it's not exactly as cut and dry as you would think,
Right.
right? Because it's a notion of, well, what is a workload, for example? It's a very fungible term.
Yeah.
So.
And also, three main classifications going back to what I was just mentioning. Typically on AWS, you'll talk about infrastructure as a service, which nominally is what this article is about, and then platform as a service. And platform as a service tends to be things like Kinesis, where you're not paying for servers directly. It's kind of a serverless system, but it still serves the purpose of core infrastructure, basically, where if you were doing it on-prem, you might have a Kafka cluster, and now you do it with Kinesis instead, and you don't see all the details, but it's still fundamentally the platform. And then you have software as a service, and AWS supports all of those pieces. And then, like you said, workloads too. And
Mhm.
often what happens with the cloud migration is that something that used to be infrastructure now becomes platform as a service or potentially even software as a service as you
Yep.
migrate.
Yeah. I think it's to me, it's more of a discussion of how you're going to evaluate your capex
Yeah.
versus your opex. Like
Yep.
that's kind of how I view these things traditionally. And actually, one of our clients, they actually decided to do a lot of on-prem precisely because um, it made their EBITDA number look better, right? So
Right.
earnings
Yeah.
before interest, and so because you depreciate your capex over time, whereas if you have an opex that hits um, you know your P&L automatically. So that's that consideration. But I would say the notion of cloud growing in size, I think is plainly evident to the kind of work that we do. And so I think we just briefly wanted to touch on again just this notion, is cloud a fad? Because it's something we keep hearing
Yeah.
from people. Uh, Oh yeah, Matt. Somebody wrote in the comments here, "Reject modernity, embrace tradition." Meme right here. Yep. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So any other thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so one of the other thoughts I had specific to data is that, and I just kind of touched on this, but let's go into it in a little more detail. If I have something like a Hadoop cluster, for example, and I migrate to the cloud, so when it's on-prem, it's kind of infrastructure. Again, I bring it into the cloud, and then it becomes like Snowflake, and then it's strictly SaaS. And so I'm kind of wondering when they do define in this article what it means to talk about infrastructure on-prem, right? Where's the paragraph that does that? Let me find it real quick. So hold on, my trackpad actually just died for some reason. I have no idea why. This is one of the things
Oh
that I suppose can happen when you're live streaming some random thing.
yeah, let me find it for you here. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, let's see. Tell me when.
Let's see. I might be able to grab it here. Smallest percentage workloads. Okay, yeah, so total for on-prem spending includes servers, storage, networking, security, and related software required to run the hardware. The software pieces included in this data is mainly server OS and virtualization software. Comparing SaaS with on-prem business apps software is a whole other story, Dinsdale said. That there is the core problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I migrate Hadoop, I probably won't use the same Hadoop setup. I'm probably not going to spin up servers that run 24 hours a day on AWS. Instead, I'm going to go to Elastic MapReduce, which kind of fits into the platform as a service category. So do I transfer, in this study, am I transferring all that spending on servers that were on-prem to EMR spending and say EMR is now my infrastructure? And then the other complication is that cloud can reduce your team spending, or at least ideally you kind of redirect those team resources to something else, somewhere else in the data stack. So people are no longer responsible for installing software on the Hadoop cluster, for example, because EMR basically does that for you. So how are you accounting for that spending? I don't think they're counting the team spending on-prem, but then some of that team spending basically gets redirected into platform as a service. And so it's a very tangled problem to understand how to think about costs moving from on-prem to the cloud. So I'm kind of wondering what they're counting in the 130 billion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, because as you look at your cloud workload migrations, so every cloud offers a total cost of ownership calculator, right?
Yeah.
But I think you hit on a good point though, because it's you got your team costs, right, and then you also have your opportunity costs, which we call total opportunity cost of ownership. So it's not just the the cost, the inputs and outputs on your P&L, right? It's also what are you gaining or losing by having rigidity or flexibility in your systems. And so got a question right here, actually. How do you scale bandwidth in and out for an on-prem storage? You almost can't. Yeah, it's kind of a question and an answer in the comments here. So.
Okay, now I'm seeing these come through. I was on the private chat side of this.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone, kind of like StreamYard newbies here.
Yeah, we're just figuring this out as we go.
Yeah, but no, I mean, Joseph, the person who made that question and comment, it's absolutely right. It's I mean, you have to anticipate, your needs, and as humans, I mean, we're, I think, okay at planning. Your on-prem spend actually becomes more of a self-fulfilling prophecy, though, in some ways. It's like, we bought this, so now we need to allocate this much. It sort of reminds me of the Parkinson's law, some sort of adaptation of that. Parkinson's law basically says that you'll take as long to do something as the amount of time you're given to do it. So if I gave you like a week to go across the street or something, you would probably take that long. And in a similar respect, I think buying infrastructure sort of has its own Parkinson's law, where you're, but you also capped at it, right? So.
And to this comment specifically, I would add, we have seen that when you're in this hybrid state, you do have to spend a lot of money on bandwidth. Like basically you just end up having to pay for a big pipe. And there are other complications like data egress costs, right? So you buy the big pipe and then you can push from on-prem to the cloud, but if you go the other way, it costs you money unless you pay for the special pipe like AWS Direct Connect. I don't think you have to pay for data egress anymore, but that gets very complicated in terms of the network connections required to do that and your proximity to the data center and such. So
sure. My mic was over here. What are the challenges of distributed computing that companies face today?
That's an interesting question too. Yeah, and our domain of expertise, again, is more in the data area. And I think with cloud data warehouses, they kind of take care of a lot of these details, although your users need to be cognizant of how they write queries so that they work well in a distributed environment. It's the whole, columnar database thing and joins and such. That's a key challenge. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, one thing I see though, especially in the database end of things, right, is distributed transactional databases. And so that's one of the areas that I see, at least personally, I've seen where there's been some challenges that companies face. So, and that tends to be addressed too, like the clouds, I think, all have their own proprietary
awesome databases that can handle distributed workloads and scale this out. So you got like Aurora and AWS, Cosmos and Azure and Spanner and GCP. Right. And so all these things I think are tailor made for solving at least that sort of distributed problem. But again, there's I think a ton of distributed problems out there that we haven't talked about.
Well, and I think, I kind of heard in the Spark framework, which is much more on the analytics side, even if you're talking about streaming, tuning can be a key challenge, right? Scaling your instances appropriately and writing the jobs to run well distributed. It's a hard problem. If you're good at it, then there are definitely jobs for you out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you're a distributed wizard, like definitely find work. Eric Senzig replies to Addie's question, costs on the business side. I think it's a big challenge. So, it's, what do you think some of the costs are?
That's a good question. I think the cost of training is way underappreciated. I've seen again and again where companies get excited about cloud and they jump into it, but then they try to do everything exactly the same way as they've done it on-prem. And it turns out that most things in cloud are worse than they are on-prem if you try to do the same thing. Like you kind of need to figure out the cloud native way of doing things. And as per our recent show, we're big advocates of certification too, because the certifications do teach you things about how to think about cloud infrastructure. But I think that's one of the key costs is just like retraining people and then rebuilding processes to do things appropriately in the cloud to still maintain your security policies. But you really need to kind of rewrite your security policies to reflect the realities of cloud networking working rather than on-prem networking, for example.
Yeah, I think the easiest example of this is when people leave servers running 24/7. The cloud offers you, I think, a lot of options to rethink your infrastructure. Nothing wrong with just migrating an existing application into the cloud, but if you're just going to be replicating what you do in your data center, I don't know that that's the best approach, and we'd probably advise you against that actually, because you actually are going to spend more money doing it that way, and you're probably better off doing it on-prem if that's the case. Because the reason you'd want to move to the cloud is again to adopt a lot of cloud native ways of thinking and a lot of cloud native ways of doing stuff. So things like even serverless, for example, fancy buzzword, great technology if you know how to use it effectively. And use VM. Figure out what the alternatives are to just using a VM. Right? There's quite a few actually. So.
And then even if you are going to move your app over and still use servers for a while, can you set up auto scaling, for example? These kinds of details, whereas on-prem, you had a certain server reservation. These are my servers for this web application. Maybe I provision slightly more before I know I'm going to have a big retail day. But in the cloud, you can configure all kinds of auto scaling around that. But you do need the appropriate training and processes for that to really save money.
Yeah. And for data workloads, I think are interesting, especially when you get into machine learning workloads. I could make a pretty strong argument that if you're just doing, if you're just testing out models and training them, you might be better off having your own GPU on-prem. So, but that said, when it comes time to productionize your models, you should consider using the cloud.
Yeah, and I think Google specifically would argue that if you're going to use TensorFlow, you should use their TPUs, right? But that, again, can involve refactoring. And so it's not as simple as just taking what you're doing on-prem and moving it to the cloud. There are big advantages, but you have to do it in the cloud-native way. And I assume, was there an announcement about AWS doing some application-specific integrated circuits as well? If not, I'm sure those things are coming. It's just a trend in the industry to have more specific chips to do very specific machine learning workloads.
Yeah, they announced a couple at reInvent. They have a new. I think it's the second version of the inference chip or something like that. But right. So, but yeah, for you to buy your own hardware doing that, that's a lot of money. So, especially right now when GPUs are in a shortage anyway, like good luck, because everyone wants to. Everyone needs their GPUs. So, but I think back to the question: is cloud a fad? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It doesn't look like it. I think my assessment recently, writing something about this, was that most big data type workloads are probably moving to the cloud in the future. Now, big data is a term that's kind of gone out of fashion, but in general, this is the idea that you can process huge amounts of data, and in the cloud, you can do that elastically. So I don't have to pay 24 hours a day for the infrastructure to process a big petabyte query. I could just pay for that infrastructure once as I use it and then spin it down. And so I think that's the general drift that we'll see. There will probably be some exceptional industries that stay on-prem because of the specifics of their workloads, but I think a lot of data is going to be moving to the cloud in the future.
I mean, bring up an interesting point too, right? Yeah. We talk about big data all the time, like it's something that's mysterious and cool.
Right.
But a lot of companies don't have big data.
It's true,
right? And so, but I still think that there's something to be said for moving your workloads into the cloud. Like even one of our customers, is very, very small. I mean, they run all their analytics in BigQuery. And why? Well, because it's a best of breed solution, even for small amounts of data.
Yeah.
I don't think they pretend to have anything resembling big data, but it's just the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
So.
And it might not be quite as fast for small data as some other solutions that are really targeted to small data, but it's turnkey. And organizationally, if I have a small team, that's a huge advantage as well.
Mm-hmm.
To just be able to turn it on and not worry about any of the details and how to.
Yeah, and this is I think the big advantage we're talking about, right? It's the opportunity costs. Is it your core competency to spin up infrastructure and maintain it, or is it your core competency to do stuff like analytics for your business or like running your business or stuff like that? Addie asks, what are our thoughts about hybrid solutions for big data on-prem plus cloud?
Yeah, and I think for that one, I think the trend there is that your huge batch jobs are probably moving to the cloud. I think many companies will continue to maintain web servers on-prem and then maybe just stream the data to the cloud. And because of the way data network access costs work, where you pay egress but not ingress, that can be a very efficient paradigm. Just run those servers, stream to the cloud, and then you can do big batch jobs on demand when you need to.
Mm-hmm. I guess she also asked, what do we define as a big data right now?
And that is a very good question. Yeah, I kind of think you're kind of getting into the big data realm when you're talking maybe 100 terabytes, just because for many on-prem infrastructure systems, that can still be a challenge, whereas it's fairly straightforward in the cloud. What do you think?
Is it a size question though? I mean, because the original definition of big data, I mean, it incorporated the 3 V's, right? So volume, variety, and what was the third one? Like velocity, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I think that the word big just throws people off because it's like, well, is my data big or not big, right? And so it gets into this kind of scenario where you're arguing about who has the hardest boiled egg.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I just define it as data personally anymore.
Yeah.
Like big or small is sort of irrelevant. It's more of like what do you plan on doing with it? And like in what context? Because the velocity question, right? That's obviously addressed right now by a lot of awesome streaming applications. Like what's up, Kafka? Volume. You have any number of systems out there that are fully capable of handling any size volume, whether it's small or as big as you can imagine, right? And so variety again, there's a lot of heterogeneous data out there right now, and data is only growing. So but notice I didn't use the word big data in that. I think that it was a term that was popular a bit ago, but I think it was actually a bit of a distraction and a bit of a red herring to call it big data. So,
yeah, I think one of the big changes in the cloud that kind of obliterated the term big data is the fact that you have object storage. And so if you're on-prem building a Hadoop cluster, you had to think about how big your data was. That would determine what disks you bought, how many nodes. In the cloud, you just dump it into S3, and S3 can handle small data or big data, no problem. You don't even blink. You can throw 5 terabytes per object into S3 and just process it on some kind of system that's turnkey that will scale up to whatever your needs are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do you think about Joseph wrote a comment here? If you write your ETL appropriately, it should cost about the same no matter how many instances you're using.
And so I think what he's getting at here, correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but I think the idea here is that you can scale up large to do your ETL quickly, or you can scale down to do it slowly. And because it's auto-scaled, like the costs are probably going to be pretty similar unless you somehow become extremely de-optimized in some scenarios. And so you might as well do it quickly, right? Like deliver the data faster if you can.
I like the idea of slow data. Let's start that movement.
Handmade, like sous vide data or something.
Yeah, let's make the Etsy for data. Just
I mean, there's something to be said for this, though, right? That's kind of was the big point of the paper I was reading this morning. This Google research paper talking about what do they call it, like cascading problems with data, basically, and how people who are collecting data and pre-processing data aren't doing enough of that initial work to really understand what the data is and make sure that it's in good shape and good quality.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that paper next week. Yeah.
So Joseph commented on this. Yeah, agree. Like that is the great thing about cloud, right? You can spin up a lot of instances at once, do things quickly, and then spin down again. This is, I think, some people call this hurry up and get idle. So in other words, like, oh, I have a lot of resources. Let's just use a lot of those resources, get the job done, and then just turn everything off when I'm done with it. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else we want to talk about? Any listener questions out there, comments before we cool. Talkative group.
Cool. Lots of good questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So this is a new format for the Monday morning data chat. Rather than pre-recording, we might continue doing it this way, or we might have kind of separate Q&A during the week on LinkedIn Live. So thanks to everybody tuning in, and we'll see you next week. So see you, Matt.
Take care.